The whole second page here.
Okay, great. So our panelists for today, for our Sustainable Health panel, is Monika Sheikh. She is a Villanova graduate with a BA in Political Science. Monika's current role is serving as the New York-Presbyterian Hospital Sustainability Program Manager, previously holding other sustainability-related titles within the hospital. While working at New York-Presbyterian, Monika has been responsible for developing and overseeing strategies, content, and execution of comprehensive environmental management systems and sustainability programs. This includes programs around sustainability procurement, waste diversion, energy and water conservation, employee and community engagement, as well as corporate sustainability measures. Prior to her work at New York Presbyterian Hospital, Monika worked with the Rockefeller & Co. Inc. as a project manager, and later as a VP of special projects within the philanthropic office of Allison Whipple Rockefeller. Thank you so much for joining us, Monika. In addition, we have Joe Minott, who is a Villanova Law graduate. Joe has spent most of his career at the Clean Air Council, serving as their executive director for 38 years. I honestly didn't believe your LinkedIn page and went to confirm that on another page, but it's true.
No, I fear it is true.
It's incredible. Under Joe's watch, the Clean Air Council moved its headquarters to Philadelphia, began its sustainable energy education program to educate people about their ability to choose cleaner electricity suppliers, pushed the state legislation to ban smoking in public places, successfully pushed for the Delaware's curbside recycling law, sued to stop the fracking company Mark West from drilling in the Marcellus Shale, and has since continued to seek to hold fracking companies accountable through their programs such as the Protection of Our Children, a campaign to stop natural gas drilling near schools, and most recently sued the US EPA for trying to delay methane rules, and went to court to halt the construction of the Mariner East 2 pipeline. In addition to his Villanova education, Joe holds a BA and MA in political science from the University of Pennsylvania. We welcome both of you, and I'm going to turn it over to Joe to get us started. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm going to try to be brief, so you have time to ask a lot of questions. So there are hundreds, if not thousands, of definitions of what sustainability is, and there's one that I particularly like. It was first enunciated by a Quaker named John Woolman in 1772, and I can't do it by memory, so I'm gonna have to read it. The produce of the earth is a gift from our gracious Creator to the inhabitants, and the impoverished. And to impoverish the earth now to support outward greatness appears to be an injury to the succeeding age. In other words, we merely hold our environment in trust for future generations. And in fact, there is a provision in the Pennsylvania Constitution that says just that. You don't have to be a Quaker to fully understand the moral obligation that all of us alive today have in caring for the environment or resources like air and water, land, forests, oceans, because that's what we leave behind, and that's what our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and so on have to live with. It's sort of like being a good guest. You want to leave your guest room cleaner than how you found it, not in the worst shape. So I am the executive director and chief counsel at the Clean Air Council. I supervise a staff of 32 people throughout Pennsylvania. So we cover all of Pennsylvania, we cover all of Delaware, and we do some work, or especially around natural gas, because that's our sort of forte, in New Jersey, New York, and a little bit in Ohio. We are a statewide advocacy group. We were started in 1967. That was 3 years before Earth Day. And we were actually created before most of America's great environmental laws, such as the Clean Air Act Clean Water Act that were created in the 1970s. Pollution, local and global, is making life on planet Earth less and less sustainable. I believe global environmental degradation is closely connected to social injustice and poverty, whether it's in the United States or whether it's global. All of the Clean Air Council's work involves either community organizing, that is, you're working with the community to get them what they want, how they want to see improvements in the community, to working around local, state, and federal regulations, policies, and laws. The council works to ensure that environmental laws are fully enforced, and we will file suit against government or industry if they are not. And we are a fairly litigious organization. I don't think we are, but I've been called a environmental jihadist. It shows sort of how I'm seen by some. We also do advocacy work, where we work to get laws passed and changed that we think improve sustainability and the environment. So one of the ones that we're doing in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia right now, is trying to get a ban on single-use plastic bags. We think that's going to move forward. There's some problems with the Pennsylvania State Legislature. They're very conservative and they're trying to block us. And we're probably best known for a lawsuit that we filed. Actually, it was already filed by the time I came to the Clean Air Council, which was to force the Commonwealth of Pennswania to inspect emissions from automobiles. It's called the I&M program, and it's a litigation I was involved in right out of law school, and went up to the Supreme Court twice, and we won each time. So that was good. So that's sort of a little bit of what the Clean Air Council does. And if you're interested, I'll be more than glad to get into sort of the details of what we do on a sort of day-to-day, the types of people that we hire to do the work, and sort of that type of stuff. But much more importantly, I get to talk about myself now, which is really the most important thing. I am the son of a US diplomat. I lived the first 16 years of my life overseas in Europe and in Africa. I went to Penn as an undergrad and a grad student, and was unfortunately on my way to get a PhD, and realized I'd have to be a professor and teach, which I did not want to do. I wanted to work for social change. So I went to law school, and Villanova was the one that I chose to go to. In fact, Clean Air Council has been the only job that I've had since I graduated from Villanova. I do teach part-time, or I have taught, actually it has been a while, at Penn in their environmental sciences department. I teach environmental policy, mostly to grad students. I live in Center City. I do not own a car. I'm a vegetarian for environmental reasons. I'm the father of 2 sons and the grandfather of 2 daughters, who I hope to grow up to be just like my hero, Greta Thunberg. So one of the things that did sort of shape my perspective is some of the countries we lived in, there was tremendous amount of poverty. And I saw how being poor makes people much more vulnerable to the environment as it is. Their water quality is worse, which means they get sick. They have a lack of sanitation. They have little access to nutritional food. And that really affected me very, very deeply. As the son of a diplomat, I was leading a pretty good life, pretty privileged life. In fact, it was a darn privileged life. I was confronted by this immense amount of poverty, and it was very, you had to soul your search to sort of figure out what kind of justice there was in having countries that were so poor. Right out of law school, I worked when I was in law school, I worked with people that had mental disabilities. If there ever was a group of people that needed legal representation, or people that have mental disabilities that have been involuntarily committed, Doctors feel like then if you've been involuntarily committed, they can treat you any way they want. And the answer is no, you still have your rights to refuse certain medications and what have you. So that was very interesting. But my passion was always the environment and working for social change through environmental issues. The struggle and opportunities that I may have faced. One of the great things is when working on environmental issues in the United States, there for most of the time, I'd say probably not the last 4 years, but for most of the time, there's been a growing consensus. It's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democratic issue. Everyone sort of wants to be an environmentalist. They define it in different ways, but they believe in the environment. They want to protect the environment. And so that's been sort of a positive in the career that I've chosen. I think the biggest probably setback that I've had to struggle with is this war on science that we're now starting to see happen not only in the United States but globally, and it is really very frightening. Good public policy, whether it's environmental policy, health policy, or what have you, has to be grounded in good science. And I'm sorry, but individual opinions are not a good substitute for policy making based on good science. And we're really seeing that, frankly, in the response to COVID-19, and we're seeing it in terms of how some people are reacting to climate change. And that is the most frustrating part of my job. The other part, just to be honest with you, if you're going to work for a nonprofit, if you're going to run for a nonprofit, you're going to spend less of your time doing the work that you love and more of your time begging people for money in order to keep the organization going. So I just have to be upfront with people on that. That's too much, far too much of my time is spent going after funds, and we have to raise about $3 million every year, and it's not fun. Let's see, how did Villanova Law School? I don't think I can either blame nor credit Villanova Law School with my chosen career. I can say that I knew I was interested in public interest law. I gravitated to just amazing professors at the law school that were taught me about mental health law, taught me about administrative law, environmental law. In fact, I give great credit to the environmental law professor at the time who actually found that there was an opening at the Clean Air Council and gave me a heads up. And that was truly sustainable because I've been here for 38 years or what have you. But it's Villanova is a great law school. I really enjoyed the
church is over. Now it's something from Villanova.
The church is over. And
Sorry, it's okay. I muted it. You're good.
Okay, I thought that was sort of a clever response to something I was saying. I was trying to figure out how quite to respond. So I'm going to stop there. I've babbled enough, but I'm hoping you have 1,000,001 questions, controversial, hard questions, and I'll be glad to answer them.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. That was really insightful and a great overview of the work that you've done. Monika?
Hi, everyone. I graduated from Villanova in 2011, and I studied studied political science in the liberal arts school and thought for sure to go to law school. I took the LSAT and realized how expensive law school was, so I thought that I'd wait a couple of years and just cut my teeth in the private sector until I could save enough money to afford to go to law school. And my first job out of college, I got a job as a project manager for the Rockefeller family, managing the different giving opportunities for Allison and Peter Rockefeller. They're a branch of the Rockefeller family, and their passion projects are really centered around environmental conservation and connecting people with the outdoors. There was a number of projects that they were working on that were related to government policy. So we were working with Congressman Steve Israel to include a question about national park citizen ownership in the new citizenship exam, so that naturalized citizens could understand that the public lands belong to the citizens of this country and not to a government entity. And so I got to work a little bit in the government side of things, but then I also got to really see how different philanthropy can help to initiate projects related to sustainability and connecting people to the outdoors. So I really fell in love with that side of things and realized that advocacy and government work so meaningful and so powerful, but a little bit slower than what I was hopeful for. And I think I just kind of fell in love with the nonprofit side of things. So I ended up focusing a lot of my attention on our land conservation work and our work to introduce people, particularly young people, women and new immigrants, to opportunities to be outside, either through our public lands or through urban parks, really centering a lot of our work around New York City. So I did that for a few years, and during that time, my father became ill with Parkinson's, and so I'd spent a lot of time in and out of hospitals. And after he passed away, I thought, I really am looking for something new. I think it's time for a life change. And I happened to see a posting for a sustainability position at the hospital where my dad was treated. So I figured, let me just throw my resume out there and see what happens. And then the very next week, I got a call from York-Presbyterian Hospital inviting me over for an interview. And so I went through a number of rounds of interviews, and I was hit with some really tough questions around waste generation and regulated medical waste and hazardous pharmaceutical waste and energy footprints and all of these things that really weren't part of my core job in my old role or in my role that I was holding at the time. And so I thought for sure that I wouldn't get the position. And after a number of interviews and many months of interviewing, I was finally offered the role, which was really exciting, but something totally new and something totally different than what I was doing. I think one of the things that I actually asked my vice president during our first one-to-one when I was in the role was, why did you hire me when I don't have that much experience? I don't have any experience when it comes to hospital operations, and how am I supposed to help make the hospital run more sustainably if I don't even understand how it runs? And he told me that during all of my interviews, I talked about how to get different stakeholders to rally different stakeholders around a central idea, especially when those stakeholders have really had started with very differing opinions on how to proceed. And he thought that a sustainability manager in any type of operation role, particularly within a healthcare setting, would really need that skill more than anything else. Being able to get different stakeholders from all across a huge organization. We have 47,000 people who work at York-Presbyterian. We have 10 different hospital campuses, and we have 2,500 patient beds. So you can just imagine the scope of the work that we do in New York City and in Westchester. And if you want to get anything done, you really just need to be able to get all the stakeholders together and rallied around a certain idea. And when it comes to sustainability, that idea, while rooted in great values and intention, oftentimes costs an organization more money, and also oftentimes requires a significant transition in the current operation or in the current procedure, which people are generally resistant to. And so I thought that was a really great lesson to have, or a great thing to understand and to be really aware of from the beginning of my role within a big organization like this. And then I spent the next year and a half probably just learning everything I could about operations, asking every single team that I had any connection to, whether I could do a walk in someone's shoes and shadow them for a couple of hours to understand what their process looks like, so that we can then come up with recommendations that really make sense and are viable solutions to some of our environmental challenges within the hospital. So I have been in my role for about 4 years now. I'm proud to say that I've been able to move into different departments. Our sustainability team has grown significantly, or not in FTE size, unfortunately, but at least in sort of scope of the work that we cover. So as of today, the NYP Green program at York-Presbyterian covers all 10 campuses, hospital campuses, plus an 11th campus, which is our corporate center in Midtown. We manage all of our metrics related to environmentally preferred food purchasing, so real efforts around reducing our meat consumption, both our meat purchasing, both for serving patients and also serving employees. Our energy footprint, although we do have an energy manager who helps to really manage that side of things. Our hospitals to collectively utilize more energy than many small towns in America. So we're really glad to have a seasoned engineer who really helps us manage our energy portfolio. All of our waste generation across all of the sites. Our environmentally preferred purchasing strategy is, I'm sure you can imagine, hospitals source a lot of items from all over the world, and we have an initiative to reduce purchasing items that have certain chemicals of concern in them, like bisphenols and phthalates, reduced packaging efforts. Obviously, in the midst of COVID, you've got all these new products that are coming in and new needs within the hospital, and a limited ability to kind of maintain some of the older processes. So a lot of changes around what we're purchasing and how we're purchasing it. And then a lot of opportunities to really educate our employees on why we're doing something, and also educate our clinicians and our practitioners on why environmental sustainability is so important and how it's directly integrated into our mission of promoting health within the New York City community and within the global community. I think I've answered all the questions. I suppose, does anybody have any questions for me now?
Yep, so we're going to be getting some questions in here from the audience, but maybe to get us started, I personally have a question. This summer in particular, there's been a strong increase in people's understanding of the connection, or the attempt to understand maybe the connection between sustainability and social justice issues, previously commonly put under the umbrella of environmental justice. And a lot of those injustices impact people's health. That's typically what we're commonly referring to as health injustices. And this is not a new thing. This has gone on for a very long time, but climate change presents a very real and additional impact to those already disadvantaged communities. And I guess I wonder from both of your point of view, both from like a policy point of view, or from what an institution can do to try to address some of what we're seeing and what we know will probably come about with climate change.
Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first? I'll just go then. So I think obviously the first thing we have to do is recognize that climate change is here and it's happening, and we need to address it. We need to address it in the United States, and we need to address it, help address it globally. In the last 4 years, we've sort of gone the wrong direction in that way. Environmental justice is part of the sort of institutional racism that we have in America, and I think it's a reflection of it. So what happens, the reason it impacts low-income communities of color more is that they tend to live closer to major highways, ports, sort of transportation facilities. They live they're more likely to live next to a polluting industry. They're more likely to have an area that they live in an area that floods on a regular basis. These are all, and they live in an area that has not a lot of green space, which means that it doesn't cool down as much at night. And that became a real problem during COVID-19, because not a solution, but one of the things that they would do is open up public buildings to let low-income people going to the air conditioning during very hot nights. Well, they couldn't really do that anymore because of COVID. So climate change, I think, is the existential threat that we face. Well, I should say that you face, because I'm not going to be here that much longer. I think to be totally honest with you, if we had started dealing with it when I first started at the Clean Air Council in 1982, we knew about it. We could easily have started tackling it, but we didn't. And so now we're in 2020, and honestly, we're not going to stop climate change. It's already here. The best we can do is slow it down and adapt to it. And I'm sad to have to say that.
So I'll kind of piggyback on what Joe said around those instances of high heat days. One of the studies that we did at the hospital was really to identify whether who is most impacted by the high heat instances that take place in New York City. And of course, we saw that a lot of the patients who came into our emergency department seeking care related to heat stroke, if you will, lived in areas of New York City that experience high rates of brownouts and blackouts. So essentially, when there's a high heat day in New York City, there's a lot of electricity being used throughout the city. And on the grid, there are certain areas of the city that are more vulnerable and more likely to lose power in those instances. And we tend to see that happens in these low-income communities where there's a lot of families living in more compact apartments in certain areas of the city that just don't have the same grid infrastructure that some of the other areas of the city, like the Midtown or the Upper East Side, would have. And so one opportunity for us as an organization, for example, to help address this is, like Joe said, coming up with these areas where folks can go to have access to air conditioning during high heat days, but also thinking about how we can support the grid during these high heat events so that we can reduce our loads so that that energy can be used by folks in the community who need it the most. So oftentimes during these high heat events, we go into an energy demand response event where we reduce our energy load and basically turn off everything that we can so that that energy can be available to others in the community.
Wow, that's a great example, a real world example of what an institution can do. So that's really great. I'm gonna follow up, Monika, with another specific question geared towards you. Given COVID, have we seen some sustainability purchases kind of pushed, or sustainability policies initiatives pushed to the side so that the institution can take more action on issues that are really top of mind with the COVID crisis?
So I think with this particular pandemic and New York City being the epicenter of the crisis, particularly in March and April, it really shook things up in all forms in all areas of hospital operations. So while on some sides there were a lot of things that had to be put on hold because priorities change, and obviously the health of the community and the most pertinent health issue needs to take center stage. There were a lot of sort of ancillary benefits or things that had always been off the table that are now on the table, which is kind of really exciting from a sustainability perspective, because it does, that when the pandemic winds down, that we'll be able to go back to some of those operations that we had in place. But now, in addition to that, there's all this new opportunity. I'll tell you, for example, with PPE shortages across the nation, for the first time ever, people are thinking about reprocessing PPE in a much more legitimate way. So whereas no one would have ever been would have been so many barriers to implementing a PPE reuse policy, where you're basically sterilizing or sanitizing different personal protective equipment for reuse. Folks would just generally be more inclined to want to go with that single use. They know it's clean, they know it's never been used, they know no one's been exposed to it. Now with the PPE shortages, we've been more inclined to consider different opportunities to reprocess and reuse this type of equipment. So that's one example. I'll also tell you, in a hospital setting, working remotely, frankly, for many team members, that's just frankly not possible. But for those who work in areas like the retirement team, like the finance team, that has generally in our industry not really been endorsed, and mostly it's because we've got a whole group of folks who need to be on site all the time, and so we consider the entire organization sort of frontline care workers, because we all sort of are helping to address that the need of our frontline teams. And so while remote work generally we were not inclined to really promote or endorse remote work, at least not widely, we now have all these opportunities to see what teams don't necessarily need to commute in every day. And right now we're doing a really interesting scope 3 emission study to understand if we did reduce the amount of time that folks had to, amount of days that folks had to come into work, let's say working remotely 2 days a week and 3 days a week in person, what would be the reduction in our carbon impact just by giving our employees that opportunity to not have to commute in. And then similarly, what is the impact on productivity and efficiency? And we really are excited that there's, for the first time ever, an opportunity to demonstrate that we can just be just as productive and just as efficient, but still have a significant carbon reduction.
That's awesome. I love seeing people take this horrible pandemic crisis and use it as a potential positive. I'll say this panel is basically an example of that. You know, being able to connect with folks all across the country easily, and people assuming that things will be virtually anyways has made this a lot easier.
If I can just piggyback on those, but I do think that the whole idea of telecommuting is going to change sort of downtown areas permanently. We had the same thing. I mean, everyone would come to a central location. We would work. There's really no reason now for now that I've seen that it works so well that people can work remotely, to force them to come, you know, to one spot, which means that eventually we're going to shrink the amount of space that we rent, and I think that's going to happen with you know, a lot of businesses. So I think COVID is going to change things dramatically, like getting an old man like me to start using Zoom.
That's great. So Joe, given the length of time that you've had working on these issues, we have a question regarding the challenges that you don't see anymore compared to when you first started, and new challenges that are becoming more common compared to when you started. So kind of a before and after.
Wow, that's a really good question. I think that when I started was at a time where environmental science wasn't that far along, and so you know, we were just in the process of implementing the first great laws, like the Clean Air Act was amended that year significantly to make it much better. There was, I think, a general consensus in the country. I think most people started to focus on the environment and understanding the connection to public health, to asthma, lead poisoning, you know, things like that. So it was rather across the country, it was rather sort of a positive time to deal with environmental issues. The thing that's been interesting is that while, for instance, in my field, which is air quality in particular, the air quality has gotten substantially better in most cities, we've also found that these health standards, they keep lowering and make them tighter and tighter and tighter, because the science is starting to tell us that yes, that in fact fine particulate at a very low level can be quite a threat. So I would say, to answer the last part, is I would say the last 4 years have probably been the most contentious that I have participated. I've done more litigation. I've been called more names. There seems to be less of a consensus about the need to protect the environment. There was always some difference in terms of how you got there, but there was fairly broad consensus. And now you're forced to take sides. You're either sort of pro-industry, pro-jobs, or you're sort of against, and that's nonsense. All of us are pro-jobs and pro-industry, and we're also pro-environment, and that's the way it should be. So it's a lot tougher right now, especially in a state like Pennsylvania. It tends to be a fairly conservative state. The legislature is very conservative, and yeah, it's been tough.
Okay. So this one's a very specific one, but I know this is a question that I think a lot of our students, maybe learn about in college and then grapple with how, their personal changes of how they want to commit to sustainability. And so it relates to plant-based diets and limiting animal byproduct consumption. Is it true that the meat industry produces more carbon emissions than the transportation industry?
I believe that's true. I can't say that for sure, but I believe that it is true. It is a very carbon intensive industry. Yes.
Yeah, just piggyback on that and say that the World Resources Institute, the WRI, has done a lot of work around capturing sort of the carbon impact of all different types of meat products and also all different types of plant-based products. It's beef, lamb, and goat that have the highest carbon footprint, and it's associated with anaerobic digestion. And so it's probably that, and not taking airplanes, probably the single greatest thing that an individual can do to reduce their carbon footprint.
Well, the only thing I would add to that has nothing to do with meat, but we also need to get away from the car culture in the United States. Too many of us drive too far alone in our cars. And that's not the fault of the driver. It's the fault that we don't have really good public transit, train system, and ways to get people from A to B that is safe, affordable, comfortable. And so people prefer to just drive. And that obviously transportation has now become one of the biggest sources of greenhouse gas emissions.
Great, thank you both. Monika, I'm gonna pass this one to you first, at least, because I'm guessing you've had this conversation. But why is it so hard to talk to business people about spending money to save money on energy and the environment? They say, for example, HVAC systems that can save 30% or more through efficiencies with simple programming changes. It seems like they just want to say no. They don't want to hear it. So I'm sure you've had some of those conversations at least once or twice. So how do you get people on board by changing behaviors?
Yeah, so I'll say the biggest, the reason why I think people resist so much is that oftentimes the capital budgets and the operating budgets are separate and managed by different stakeholders. So it's traditionally, it can sometimes be hard to get someone to spend their capital dollars on to save operational dollars that they don't necessarily own. They're not seeing the bang for the buck, so they're less inclined to sort of support those type of infrastructure projects or capital projects. But I think one really great phenomena in a lot of different organizations and across many industries is sort of the idea of this revolving green budget. I'll tell you, for example, at NYP, we have a certain figure in the 7 digits where we allocate each year to green infrastructure projects. And essentially those projects just have to have a payback for the organization that is less than 5 years. So as long as we can demonstrate that we'll be able to be paid back for that money, we'll be able to look for different utility incentives for that money, and also that we'll save money over time. Within the next 5 years, we're able to invest that money into different infrastructure projects. So this green revolving funds is a really interesting concept. And if you don't know about them and you're interested in sort of the energy or facility side of things, it's definitely something that you might want to look into. I will say that that's purely in a green revolving fund really only works in a facilities type realm. A lot of the other types of projects that you would implement that are related to sustainability come at a cost. So there's oftentimes not a quantifiable payback that you can use to tap into a revolving fund for.
So if I obviously I'm not as expert, but I would say that the return on investment, the quick return on investment or the short return on investment is probably the biggest barrier. I'll give you an example. If you want to put solar panels on your roof, all of that expense is up front. And you know, it'll take 8 years or 10 years to sort of get that investment back. So unless there are real incentives to do that, it's hard to get people to change. I'll give you a perfect example. Philadelphia is full of idling trucks all the time. Idle, and it makes no sense because they're just wasting energy, and it's a habit. They've gotten in the habit. They're comfortable with what they're doing. Change is difficult, and we all know that change is difficult. And so I think it's trying something new. It takes someone with sort of real leadership that can say, you know, you really have to do this. And it's not only right for the environment and public health, it's also right because you're going to save in the long term.
Yeah, no, that is a great example and something that definitely frustrates me when I'm walking around and have to smell all that exhaust.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I'll start this with you, Joe, but Monika, definitely feel free to tag on as well. So given the grim outlook that you expressed, and this is directed towards you, about our future in terms of climate change, if there's any one single change or goal that we as a younger generation were to focus on, what would that be? What would have the most impact, in your opinion? And what methods have been the most effective in your experience in accomplishing those goals? Which I think is a really great addition to that question.
That is a great question. And I guess this may be a simplistic answer, but vote for people that believe in science. That has got to be the single most important thing you can do. Because if policies are based on science, you're going to get a good end eventually. But if you elect people that don't believe, for instance, climate change, the head of the in Pennsylvania, the head of the House Energy and Environment and Energy Committee is a climate science denier. So, and he has the ability to stop almost all legislation, you know, that would improve. So I think that really is important. Is yes, who you elect really has a great impact. I'm split. You know, I used to be really quite an optimist and believe that if as Monika was suggesting, we could just get all the stakeholders together and you know, figure out a plan that we would end up someplace good. That has not been my experience on sort of big policy changes. What has driven that, as far in terms of the work that I've done, is actually the litigation that I have done, which is unpleasant. It's confrontational, and you don't always get what you want. But it sort of forces the issue. That being said, I think I've earned the right to be cynical. I think all of you don't have that right yet. I think that you need to fight for the world that you want, and I think that's sort of your moral obligation to do that. I mean, I'm still doing it at age 66, and I'm going to do it until however my wife decides to dispose of my ashes or what have you. But we haven't really talked about that yet. But I think the world is your oyster, and if you have a good sense of morals and ethics, and if you do what Monika did, which is get a job where she's making a difference quite soon after she graduated from college, I would say there's reason for optimism.
Yeah, I'll just say I couldn't agree with Joe more that the single greatest thing that you can do is to vote for people who have values that are aligned with yours. While having stakeholder engagement is really important and a great way to drive things forward, when it's the law, and it has to be done. And a lot of the lobbying and sort of stakeholder niceties that are needed when it's just an idea, once it's a law, you've got to get it done and you've got to implement it. And it's probably the way once it's once it's on paper, it's something that everybody's got to do, and it's the way get things implemented in the most quick fashion, regardless of what the political environment is within a particular industry or in a particular organization. So I couldn't agree with Joe more.
One more thing that I want to add to that. One is, don't think of America as being separate from the rest of the world. We're part of the global community. And on things like climate change, we have to work together. It has to be a global solution. We did that for the chemicals that were destroying the ozone layer. We all, the countries got together and realized like this is really serious, and they did it. And we can do the same with climate change. But there's got to be a will to do it.
Yeah, no, you make a really great point, Joe, that the Montreal Protocol, I believe that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep, that addressed the ozone hole was a huge accomplishment and something that I keep hoping happens for climate change. So we have a question from a student who is interested in entering the healthcare field and is looking for recommendations on how to help advocate for sustainability. Quite honestly, this is partly why I was so excited for this panel. We have a nursing school, we have other students who are interested in health and healthcare, and we've had a hard time trying to find speakers who can speak to this topic. So interested to hear what you have to say to these students who are looking for that sweet spot of those two merging together.
Sure. So the first thing I would say is there's a really great, who is, I think it's the World Health Organization that has this graphic that I use in pretty much every single slide deck I do at the hospital that really talks about all the different ways that climate change impacts human health, from changes in vector ecology to forced migration to extreme weather events. And I'd really become familiar with that image, and also with sort of all of the evidence that that image was based off of. I think it really helps to tell the story. And I think it's, especially if sustainability is more of a passion project and you're interested in going into more clinical work or more traditional healthcare work, becoming familiar with one particular focus area and sort of becoming a subject matter expert, if you will, in that area can help you really initiate change quicker, I think, than just sort of being a generalist. I say that as a generalist, so perhaps it's a little bit of mixed messaging there, but I do feel like in my role, I lead on the experts who really understand these issues very deeply. And we have a cardiologist who gives us a lot of information about sort of what's going on with PM 2.5 and heart disease related to climate change. And we've got another infectious disease expert who really weighs in on trends in Lyme's disease and how that really correlates to climate change and changes in temperature. So I think if sustainability is your passion, certainly please pursue it in whatever career you go into, whether it's sustainability or related or not, and think about where you can make a difference and consider becoming a subject matter expert so that you can drive change wherever you exist, either in your career or in your personal life.
I think that's exactly right. I would say that if you're thinking of going into the medical profession, doctor, nurse, respiratory therapist, don't be non-political. I have a marvelous primary care physician, and he absolutely refuses to get involved in politics. You don't have that luxury. You have more credibility as a healthcare provider than I will ever have as an environmental activist. Use it. Don't waste it.
Oh, great. Thank you both so much. And just, for our students, if you're looking for an on-campus resource, some of you may already be familiar with Professor McDermott Levy, but she is a fantastic resource on campus who is a nurse, is an advocate, is on the front lines doing research, writing papers, and speaking to legislators, and does run our global health minor as well. And so she is also a fantastic on-campus resource that I will include her name in the chat so that you can find her easily if that's something you're interested in.
Two actually other resources that I think are important to mention are Practice Green Health. It's a consortium of healthcare organizations that are committed to reducing their environmental footprint. And then associated organizations called Healthcare Without Harm. And that's really a consortium of different healthcare professionals who are interested in driving forward policies and changes to support environmental stewardship. I'll put that in the chat.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you for doing that. Joseph, we have a really specific question about a policy. What's your policy point of view on the significance of California's 2035 EV promise? And is it possible or likely that this will be copied in other states? I'm quite honestly don't know what this policy is, so I'm excited to learn more about it.
Yeah, so it's actually pretty straightforward. California was already dealing with automobile emissions or transportation emissions when the Clean Air Act sort of got its, was created, and the EPA started to create a national standard. So in the United States, essentially, there are two standards for emissions from or regulations dealing with cars. One is the California standard, and one is the federal standard. Well, almost everyone goes with the California standard because they're so large and what have you. And Pennsylvania joined, so we adopted the California standard. There is a provision in the law that says technically California, and there's an EV component, by the way. I'm sorry, to answer your question. There is an EV requirement to the California standard. It will be issued, so there is a requirement that periodically California get EPA's permission to continue with what they call a waiver, having their own standard. And that's been routinely granted by the Reagan administration, the Bush administration. It's like not a Republican or Democratic issue, but has been denied by the Trump administration. And so that's going to be litigated. In fact, it is being litigated. I think California is being very bold in terms of moving forward with their EV standard, and I do think it's going to be adopted nationally at some point. We just have to sort of straighten things out a little bit. But there's also a concern. I mean, don't forget that EVs tend to be more expensive. You need to charge them, and so don't forget the environmental justice communities in this. It's sort of very easy to talk about how wonderful EVs are, and they are. I mean, if you see the Teslas around here, they're great. I love them, but we got to make sure that the programs that we develop work for all of the residents of the community, and not just some. And I think California will do that. They're actually pretty good at doing that. But I just want to put that out there.
Great, thank you. That is helpful overview and information. So within our remaining minutes, I like to always end our panels with just an opportunity for both of our panelists to kind of give some advice to our students who may be graduating this year, maybe graduating next year. If they're interested in pursuing a career in sustainability, what are some of the steps that they might take to be successful in that, given whatever we want to call this economy at this point in time, recognizing that there's a lot that can change between now and May graduation date. So best overall general advice would be great.
So I think life is long and it is hard, and you should always do something that you're passionate about. I am passionate about the environment. I'm passionate about social change. And so I have made some sacrifices because of that. I don't get the salary that I would if I was at a large law firm. These are decisions that you have to make. They're hard to make when you're really young, but go with your passion. And that sometimes means, for instance, I'll tell you the hiring process at the Clean Air Council. You can be the best in your class, if I don't see on your resume some level of commitment to social change, it's going to be hard for you to get a job at the council. We're willing to train people in community organizing, we'll send you to school and what have you, but we want to see that there's a commitment that you won't just be here for a year or two and then sort of go do something else. I mean, obviously, it happens. If you don't have the right credentials, I would say, I'm not talking about for the Clean Air Council, but more in general, the advice I gave my son was, if you can afford it, and I realize it's an income thing, volunteer at a place that you'd like to work. Find the contacts there, learn what they do, and that can be a great entree into a career. Now, Monika just was so great that she walked in something that she felt she wasn't fully qualified for, she was passionate about, and persuaded them to give her a job. I think that's great. You should definitely go for what you want to do.
I'll say that I am optimistic, particularly with the social justice movement that's really reignited in this country over the last many months and years, really many months, that environmental justice and environmental stewardship will become something that is more prioritized across all industries in this nation and across the world. And so I'm hopeful there that a career in sustainability will be viable, and Joe suggested may not have some of the the same sort of ceiling income that some other industries have, but at least you will feel secure that there will be job opportunities throughout your career in sustainability. I guess one thing that I would say as a student or early in your career, I would really encourage you to cut your teeth on different things. If you're interested in something, give it a try, be exposed to it. And if you're really passionate, know exactly what area of focus you want to work in, for example, sustainable food, for example, and you know that that's where your career is going, spend the early part of your career, or even now while you're still in school, working for the other side of that coin. So if you're interested in sustainable food, consider working for a big food service provider like a Compass or a Restaurant Associates, and really understand what the operational challenges are that hinder some of the work that needs to be done to promote environmental stewardship. Because if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, and there's a lot of challenges and there's a lot of barriers, and the more understanding you can have of those barriers and the more experience you can have working through those barriers, the more successful you'll be later on in your career when you have an opportunity to work on the other side and really promote these really important interventions.
I think that's worth $1 million right there. I think in whatever career you want, if you're passionate about it, if it's going to be advocacy, you need to understand where the other side is coming from. If you can't relate to them at all, then you're never going to be successful. The other thing I would say is go for informational interviews. I don't think I've ever turned down anyone that's asked to come talk to me about what it's like to be in an environmental group. And I have a really busy schedule, but I enjoy doing that. Don't be afraid to call people up and say, can I just come in and talk, or can we have a few minutes on the phone? And those people will also know where the jobs are. So I'm one of the first people that knows in this area when there's an opening at another environmental group, because we talk to each other. So don't be afraid to go for informational interviews. It's just a great way to get to know the business and where the openings are.
Wow, both of you, great words of advice. Always something new with every one of our panels, so we really appreciate you sharing your insight and experiences. For those who are on the call, if you're interested in connecting with our panelists, we encourage you to connect with them on LinkedIn. It's a good way to broaden your network within LinkedIn and do some of those informational interviews and make those connections. I also encourage you to connect with myself on LinkedIn, because I have spent a number of years trying to build out a network of sustainability professionals in lots of different fields, so you'll have easier access to maybe folks that you might have had a harder time getting in touch with before. With that, I'm going to end the recording.